they actually contacted us and sent 3 state police detectives, New York State Police, to our corporate office, asked us for a meeting for a couple of hours to discuss how they can help us develop and close cases for both of our operating companies. I've been in asset protection for over 30 years. I have never heard of that happening. And when they called, I was like, book a conference room, let's get this going. That was a couple of years ago, and it's worked out great. So things are changing. We need to take advantage of it.
You're listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror, where we share actionable insights to help you reduce crime and violence in your stores.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacque Brittain, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I'm the editorial director for LP Magazine. I'm also the director of learning design and certification for the Loss Prevention Foundation. Today's webinar is on grocery ORC, retailers and law enforcement working together. And that webinar will be sponsored today by Auror. Auror is the crime intelligence platform for retailers focused on preventing crime, reducing loss, and making stores safer. They do this by making it easy to report actionable intelligence, connect the dots on repeat offenders, and distribute actionable intelligence to teams to safely prevent crime in real time. Auror has offices in Denver, London, Melbourne, and Auckland to support its growing retail base, which includes the best and largest retailers in the world. To learn more, go to www.auror, that's AUROR.co. Organized retail crime and grocery is evolving fast, and the tactics that worked just a few years ago aren't keeping up. Today, we're bringing together LP leaders from across the grocery industry to share what actually is working in their stores right now. We will learn how these leaders are reducing ORC through intelligence sharing, law enforcement partnerships, and smarter retail data, plus the honest lessons from what did and didn't work along the way. Guys, we're just going to let you introduce yourselves here. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Appreciate it, Jack. Ryan Themm, I'm the Corporate Investigations Manager at Meijer. I've been in that space for about 16 years with the company. We've got about 200 and we're growing past 270 super centers. We've got all the offerings that a grocery store has, but all the hard goods, home goods, general merchandise product, pharmacies, fuel station. Also fortunate enough to be able to work with Meijer and a lot of the technology integration stuff. So pretty passionate about all the things we're doing to make investigations and impact on ORC, a thoughtful and impactful process at Meijer. So thanks, Jack.
Well, very good. Welcome. We're glad to have you here today. Jim Simpson.
Hello, I'm Jim Simpson. I am the Director of Asset Protection for Northeast Grocery. Northeast Grocery is the parent company to Price Chopper Market 32 and Tops Markets. I've been the director here for about 4 years, and I have about 33 years experience in asset protection in the field. Most of my time is spent with Northeast Grocery and then with Stop and Shop as well as CVS.
Great to have you here, Jim. Let's move on to Raul.
Thank you, Jack. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Raul Aguilar. I'm the head of law enforcement partnerships for the Americas here at Auror. It's really a great job. I get to do this and talk about what we would do every day with helping retailers use actionable intelligence to share that with law enforcement. Prior to coming here, I ran the national initiative for Department of Homeland Security's Operation Bowling Point for the better part of 2.5 years. It was an absolute eye-opening experience of seeing how criminal networks were operating in the organized retail crime space and how money flows made it their day-to-day mission. The ability to make money and sell these products is why DHS jumped into it. So it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to contribute and listening and learning as well from my fellow panel members, and looking forward to questions from the group. So thank you for inviting us.
No, thank you, Raul. Raul's title is Head of Law Enforcement Partnerships, and I can tell you he has been a phenomenal partner since I met him. He's a great person, and we're very fortunate to have you here today. Michael, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to round us out.
Well, thank you very much, Jacque. It's a privilege to be here with these experts and be a part of today's session. I'll be doing the moderating for today. I am an old retail industry veteran. I have spent about 4.5 decades in the space. I've had the privilege of running AP organizations at Home Depot, Walmart, and then more recently Kroger, where I retired about 1.5 years ago. And as Jacque, as you mentioned on the opening, our session today is about ORC and really how it's evolved and how it's changed. And reflecting on my 4 decades plus, it was manageable 2 or 3 decades ago. Was it a problem? Yes. We all knew that. But the level of sophistication, the level of coordination, and the complexity that we see in today's organized retail crime world has changed so dramatically. And, you're talking about these serial offenders that work across multiple states. The sophistication, as I mentioned, is escalating, and so is the violence. So today's session is really amongst our panelists here about what's actually working, particularly in grocery with regard to ORC today, but not just grocery, because as we were discussing ahead of the opening, the organized retail operator really is all about just converting goods to money. So whether that's grocery, whether that's mass merchandising, whether that's pharmaceutical, you name it, a lot of these problems are very similar. So I'm delighted to moderate today and looking forward to the discussion. This is really, there's no presentation here today, folks. This is more just open conversation with some of the folks that live and work this every day. So let's get started with the first question, and this is for Raul. And as you mentioned, Raul, you've worked ORC at the Department of Homeland Security Investigations group. You speak with retailers and law enforcement daily in your current role. So in your opinion, what's changed about ORC, and why should everyone on this call be paying close attention right now?
Yeah, Mike, thank you very much. I think it's sophistication. It's moved on from the opportunistic shoplifter that everybody believes outside of our industry, just the public. These are sophisticated criminal networks. They have enhanced communication platforms to communicate with each other. We've seen them set up shop with professional grade alignment, basically saying you're going to live in the U.S. specifically to steal these items, and you're going to live in this Airbnb. I mean, it's example over example over example. They operate almost like a logistic company, and somebody's accountable for getting the money and making sure that it goes up the food chain, and who knows whatever else is funding after that. So that's the change. When I was running Homeland Security, I was able to see the initiative tie into other federal agencies. Some of the things that the Secret Service, FBI, U.S. Postal was working, it always surprised me that you would think you had it down and you were like, oh, we're going to target this stream. And then all of a sudden you had a whole nother operation working. And to that note, it brought me back to the memory when I was preparing this. I think we were joking earlier. There was a $10 million beef and pork theft that happened. 3 guys were indicted out of Miami. The thefts happened in Omaha. And when they initially made the stop of the beef, and we were joking for everybody on here about where's the beef, if you're old enough to remember that, it's not a joke. It was $1 million case that led them to 45 other thefts that had happened for a total of 10 million. And you can just Google it, type in beef theft, HSI, Omaha, and it came up in a state and local case that was worked. So that is what changed. And the fact that these crews can operate in multiple counties, the fact that they can go state to state in a single afternoon, and that they know that jurisdictionally law enforcement can't get those nuggets of information fast enough, Mike and team. That's what creates this, vortex of just the ability for them to have anonymity as they run around. Now, we're here today to talk about strategies and platform like Aura that documents those, and it's critical to do that. The other thing is, what else has changed? The fact that you can sell grocery items super fast. If we're going to just talk about grocery, it's hard to keep the evidence. These guys are stealing things, and then it's high foot traffic. So I think we're going to have a great discussion about the vulnerability gap that exists in grocery, the great work the grocery team members are doing to stop it, and then ultimately, the big goal for us at Aura is this reduction of violence, reducing 50% of violent crime in the next 5 years. We want to talk about the strategies to help mitigate that, because we all want our family members to go to work, our relatives, people that started in this industry. We all have the connection to it. to have a safe day, and also the folks that are shopping there and just minding their own business. Let's give them a good shopping experience. So in the end, we'll like to tie all this in with how do we make it safer for everybody. But that's my good intro to get us going, and I'm excited for my counterparts to chime in here, Mike.
Excellent. And thank you, Raul. Yeah, you're spot on. Profit's important. Safety of associates and customers is absolutely critical. And unfortunately, we do see a lot of safety issues arising from the threat of ORC, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I want to transition over to a question for both Ryan and Jim. In realizing that you both have been in this business many years, you've also worked in other retail verticals, right? I know, Jim, you spent some time with the Home Depot years and years ago. But what's different or distinct about ORC in this grocery vertical? And what are some of the bigger trends and risks for groceries and grocers as we look into the remaining part of 2026 and beyond? Just your thoughts. And Ryan, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I mean, we all have either similar or different products out there and different things that the ORC actors and threat actors are going to be after. But I mean, one thing I've been seeing, we offer a lot of gift cards for sale on a gift card rack, part of our gift card mall. So gift card fraud is something. I just got back from RELA last week where I was got to partake in an all-day working session with the Gift Card Fraud Prevention Alliance. That's another, multifaceted partnership with federal, state, local, retail partners, different industry partners, and solution partners, where just gift card fraud in general is a new form of organized crime that's happening in our stores. And it's growing fast. It spins off different variations on a theme. But we have to stay focused on it, between that and financial crime and fraud. We're also seeing growing attacks in the e-commerce space. Digital chargebacks, you got to keep those under control. And then reward programs, it's another thing. Over the past few years, we've seen different attacks on those with account takeover type things, or folks gaming or abusing different programs there that can impact profits. But at the same time, one of the things I'm passionate about is integrating the security ecosystem and the tools that are out there surfacing for us that we're tying all of these intel feeds together with really have helped us surface. And that known loss question, we're actually identifying more of the known loss that's out there where that question mark used to be. And, it's creating workload challenges too. What do you do with all this intel, with all these cases you might be surfacing? So balancing like ORC investigator capacity is like top of mind for me. And, do you have enough analysts to process that? And then also looking at how you leverage any of the boots on the ground, whether it's team members working in the store that are surfacing intelligence to you through different platforms, or whether it's, analysts that you have to bring on to process that. But those are kind of the trends and things that we're trying to keep up with and get ahead of, at least from the Meijer standpoint.
I appreciate that. Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have it's kind of a two-part answer. So from a product mix, I would say that the main difference, from grocery to some of the other retailers is the perishable side of it, especially, Raul kind of mentioned it, but at store level, we have obviously a lot of problems with meat, seafood, steak, crab legs, lobster tails, to be specific. So, and a lot of that people aren't stealing that 2 carriages full of that stuff to have a barbecue on the weekend. It's obviously for resale. There's obviously other issues when it comes to that, product safety and stuff like that. The second part of that answer is what's different is I feel like in the grocery retailers that I've worked for in the past and even current, there's a feeling that, especially, in Northeast Grocery with both of our operating companies, is that we want to keep the shopping experience accessible and not have, everything locked up in the store. So it's difficult, especially now, because you go into for example, Mike was mentioning Home Depot. You go into some Home Depots and you have to wait for somebody to come unlock something. We have invested more in having people out there. I have a staff of about 50 people in the field that could help with intelligence, and obviously making apprehension, stuff like that. And the trade-off is that we try to use as minimal lockup as possible when it comes to that for the shopping experience. So we're kind of investing in a different way in asset protection when it comes to that. with other versus other retailers. I think that would be the biggest difference. And I do see that in a lot of other grocery retail, that there's still the desire to keep things unlocked. And when you do that, you have to have some people in the field to prevent some of the large issues that are happening out there from an ORC perspective. So
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It's, where's that balance? And you're trying to protect it from the percentage that wants to take advantage to steal it. And at the same time, you're trying to service your good customers and risk, you get the argument you're locking up sales. I do think that's where technology and the advancement of technology can perhaps help us unlock sales a bit. And you see it in any vertical. You see it in home improvement, you see it in grocery, you see it in pharmacy, you see it in convenience. And it's just a sign of the times. But as we continue to work on these problems, hopefully technology will play a big piece there. We're going to transition over now a bit and talk about this safety imperative. And Raul, I know you speak, as we mentioned, to law enforcement routinely and retailers and clients that ORS serves. Love to get your view on what you're hearing and what we're seeing relative to this issue of violence as we open up this topic as our next piece.
Just kind of set the stage. And again, this position that I have here at Auror is a dream job because I get to talk to law enforcement that are still in the fight. I get to talk to retailers, friends that I've made, new friends at these events, RELA, ORCA meetings, NRF, and you kind of get the real of what's going on the ground. But just on the data side for Auror, our data shows that 1 in every 10 retail crime events involve physical assault, abuse, aggression, use of a weapon, some kind of violent behavior across every region. That's not acceptable, as you are shaking your head. And we know that repeat offenders are 4 times more likely, Mike and team, to be violent in these, retail settings. So what does that mean? That means if we can identify those top offenders, and we often talk about the top 10 offenders are causing 70% of the loss, how do we take a deeper dive in identifying those 10? How do we cross share that data with, those mechanisms that we can, either through direct engagement with a law enforcement ORC team or detectives or criminal division, and get them to be identified and stopped at the store as much as you can, offer customer service to prevent them from coming in, trespassing them, or ultimately get them linked into a criminal network and put them in jail for the crimes that they're committing if it all goes through prosecution. So I think that's the setting tone for this part of the conversation. Like, we know there's violence, and coming from the LE side, that was another major reason why we committed so many resources at HSI. There were deaths, violence, extreme amount of brutal violence at jewelry stores and shopping centers and grocery stores. It was just unacceptable. And our, kudos to our leadership at the time who threw some initiative money at it. And I hope and continue to pray that not only federal, but state and local, great task forces have come up in multiple cities. They're all in it for the same thing. They want safety for their community. I think that's the key. And how do we get that documented into a platform like Auror? How do we share that data and get it to law enforcement so we can prevent more of these horrific acts and the violence that we all have to live with, which you've often heard me say, not in our city, not in our community. It really takes us to say that, because it can affect any one of our family members. So I'll just leave it at that for the team to jump in, Mike, about how important we believe protecting our community is and why Auror takes it so serious to help stop violence in stores.
Yeah, thanks, Raul. And I had my cheat sheet here, to be honest with you, and speaking with your team, and these numbers are alarming. The data that you guys pull in is so rich and so powerful in terms of, just how significant this problem is. Repeat offenders, I'm showing, are 5 times more likely to be abusive or aggressive, and 6 times more likely to have some weapon. And, the fact that 1 out of 10 is escalating into violence, and you look inside those numbers.
Yeah, globally. So, but still, right? Yeah.
It's quite alarming. So that's the problem. So I'd like to kick it over to Jim and Ryan here. We'll start off with Jim, but focusing on this notion of ORC and repeat offenders is ultimately about keeping people safe, arguably more important than the profit piece. What are you seeing in your stores when it comes to violence and aggression regarding these repeat offenders? And what processes or technology have you put into place to protect your customers and your teams that you could share with our audience today? So let's start with you, Jim, on this one.
So, I would say that we have seen a significant increase in threat incidents over the past 12 months. Now, some of that is reporting. We actually utilize Aura for our threat response reporting, and we've seen probably about a 50% increase year over year in the number of incidents. Now, those are not necessarily all shoplift or ORC related. Those are just incidents total. But it obviously speaks to the problem. From an ORC perspective, one of the technologies that we use for detecting, repeat offenders or people who are constantly an issue for us is picture matching. So that's one of the tools that we utilize. We utilize it across both of our operating companies. And the good part about Aura is we're able to utilize it and basically link cases across both operating companies. So Northeast Grocery is obviously made up of two separate supermarket chains. We're the parent company. Everybody in asset protection works for the parent company. But, we do try to keep some stuff separated. And we have the ability, obviously using Aura and being from the parent company, to be able to see and link threat of violence issues, ORC cases, shoplift problems across both operating companies as a result. So that's,
Well, just to add on question. So when you identify through the technologies that you have in place or programs, how do you now deal with that individual, perhaps in the absence of having the knowledge that they're a potentially violent offender? Do you engagement from law enforcement, more evidentiary work to make sure that you get the right people engaged when these folks come back in?
Yeah, so we try to identify people, even if they've left and we've identified them as a threat. We now try to actually go out and identify them for any future issues. And we try to identify them so we can actually have them, we can trespass them. We have a no tolerance policy in both companies now at this point. Those of you that know the companies that make up Northeast Grocery, at Tops, we had a unfortunate incident almost 4 years ago now where we had a mass shooting. So there's not any tolerance in either company for any type of threats of violence. So we act on those accordingly, quickly, and we utilize that, like I said, like technologies like picture matching to see them before they come in, and we won't let them become a problem. We'll address it, have the police show up, or we'll trespass them in advance. That way we can have them charged with the case prior to them walking through the door.
Got it. Thank you, Jim. Brian?
Yeah, no, Mike, you hit the nail on the head. Like, life safety floats to the top on everything. Even if you've got a team that's running focused on organized retail crime and external cases, like Meijer spent a lot of time actually spinning up a pretty robust threat assessment program. And so my peers run that, and there's a lot of effort that goes in there. Everything that Jim just talked about, identifying what those threats are, how you can have a safety plan. Even if it is ORC stuff or not ORC and it's stuff related and there was aggression or violence, the violence prioritizes it. So I'm probably still going to lean in assets on my team to help out so we can get folks identified, and then have a plan for the next time they show up. So your team members are safe, your customers are safe. And it's nice to have tools like Aura to be able to visualize those connections of stuff, if it's at the same store or if it's at multiple stores, and really paint the picture of what the threat is. And when it comes to a criminal case and there's violence and aggression, the collaboration with law enforcement, even when you're outside of a single retailer, when you're pulling in other retailers that have seen the similar behavior, law enforcement's going to be that much more engaged to think about the problem differently. This isn't just a retail crime. It's just not an organized retail crime. It's, when you get into the safety impact with some of the threats and violence out there, I've seen some good results on how law enforcement's able to move a little bit faster, more proactively with a different viewpoint on response.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, there's, during my time when I was a practitioner, we always said there is nothing in that store more important than the safety of our associates and the customers that shop with us. And so thank you, gentlemen, for this piece on the safety imperative. It is so critical that we continue to work to help mitigate against those risks.
I don't know if we drilled down enough on this. No retailer is safe. I know, sir, you with your 40 years, you could probably talk about it all day long, and the two gentlemen that are on here. If you're thinking and not in my store because it's somebody else's problem, or we're just in this part of the U.S., the repeat offenders and the fact that they're trying to get a product to sell can impact any part of that ecosystem of retail. I reiterate the fact of documenting the case, getting it into your ORC investigators, your SOC, your analysts, whatever you have in your company, sharing it with law enforcement. Don't take no for an answer. Be a pest and get it documented, because at some point that criminal is going to make a mistake and do it somewhere else, and they're going to get caught. And then hopefully they can add those charges or that historical information to keep them away from the stores. And I say that in the sense that sometimes the competitive nature in retail prevents that exchange of information to competitors. And I think we all want a safer community. And I think we just reiterate the documentation of those events in all form if there's any violence.
You're absolutely spot on. If you don't think it can happen to you, you need to really reassess your thinking. I work for two different companies in which I attended funerals, one of them a loss prevention person, the other of a lady that lost her life on the front end of a store. And at the end of the day, there is nothing more important than the information and intelligence that helps us to mitigate against that. All right, so now we'll move over to this notion of the intelligence gap. You know, growing up in the business years and years ago, as many of you obviously know, but looking in my face, this notion of law enforcement working alongside retailers, working alongside solution providers was essentially non-existent. And while I don't think anybody on our panel would declare victory today relative to the progress we've made or where we are in total, I think there would be some alignment that we are beginning now to see some of these gaps begin to close. When you think about real-time crime centers, the workers that exist, the solution providers that are leading in like Auror, who's got great case data management that walks it to the bullseye essentially on ORC. But, you know, the problem is still there. So the notion of these three things coming together is more critical now than perhaps ever before. And when the violent repeat offender hits your store, naturally the instinct is to act fast, right? You want to get the problem resolved. But as you start to actually find and begin to work to identify or stop these offenders, Jim, I'll go with you on this one. What were you working with? So in other words, what tools did you put together that as you began to identify serial offenders that worked really well for you?
Yeah, so to go back from when I first started with Northeast Grocery, there was not, we didn't have a traditional, we'll call it organized retail crime program. We weren't going after those offenders as they are, as people that are obviously stealing to resell. And we're able to, you know, with the use obviously of some of the technologies, including Auror, now we're able to link those incidents and cases across both operating companies. And as a result, we were able to bring in, I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but we're able to bring in law enforcement into that as well by sharing the data with them where they can actually just click in and see it. So we're able to share it across multiple counties, multiple states, 2 different operating companies, and everybody's communicating. So now we expanded that out, obviously, to other retailers, and we're able to make bigger cases. And basically that, once we are, like somebody mentioned earlier, you're basically handing cases over to law enforcement where at this point they can't say no. It's too good of a case for them to just say, hey, I don't want to deal with this case that you have created for me from open to close, including what they've taken, where they've taken, who's involved, what addresses. Basically, short of having their social security number, you have everything that they need to make a case out of it. So you make it so difficult for them to say no that they have to get involved. And I do feel like that, to give law enforcement, for example, in the state of New York, a little bit of kudos. You know, there's an example, I think I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but I could just mention it now, where the state police had kind of heard about what we were doing, and, you know, through the grapevine, through some of the other police departments we were working with, they actually contacted us and sent 3 state police detectives, New York State Police, to our corporate office, asked us for a meeting for a couple of hours to discuss how they can help us develop and close cases for both of our operating companies. I've been in asset protection for over 30 years. I have never heard of that happening. And when they called, I was like, book a conference room, let's get this going, get them up here, set it up. And it's worked out that was a couple of years ago, and it's worked out great. So things are changing. We need to take advantage of it. And we need to make sure that we're not letting those opportunities pass us by when they present themselves.
Yeah, spot on. Ryan, Meijer, as you well know, operates 270 stores. You have a remote operations center. And on its face, that feels like comprehensive coverage. But when you start pulling on the same thread with violent or high priority repeat offenders, what were you finding?
Well, I mean, it's been about 10 years now since I helped build out our remote operations center. When we designed it, it was focused on, credit card chargebacks. And then we built in investigative support, and then, kept adding in new features that it could support. But 10 years ago, the tool set was way different. Using really having to do everything manual, connecting the cases manually, building out something that law enforcement can understand. And you'd probably have a few different templates on how that looks. Piecing together a single investigation had a lot more work going into it and a lot more hours of investment to build that big ORC case or that complex fraud case. Honestly, cases connected between stores, markets, and regions and states, those were a little bit harder to surface. You had to have folks really communicating well, so it wasn't that we lacked intelligence or the effort and some good cases. It was just putting it together was a lot more time consuming, not as fast. Understanding the groups of folks that we were dealing with just took a little bit more effort through lots of different disparate systems. So the solutions we're deploying now, I mean, the rock's still relevant, but now it's really figuring out at the edge, not from the top down. We got all this rich intelligence. Can we empower our folks in the stores to have a better picture and then prioritize stuff faster as a group and through good communication?
Yep. Yeah, you're teasing out this whole notion of agentic AI, which is, we'll save that for a whole nother session. But thank you, Ryan. Raul, you're in a very unique position because you've sat on both sides of the aisle, retail and in law enforcement. When retailers are operating that way, in the way in which they operate today, what does it mean for law enforcement's ability to act? And how do you see opportunities to continue to bridge this gap between law enforcement and the retail community?
A couple of things come to mind. I'll give an example of a case that here at the end of my comment here, but it's critical to document those because you don't know what piece of the puzzle is missing from a larger case. So as much as can be documented in the theft that's happening in your store, in your own ecosystem, your ethos that you can control, because law enforcement, as you know, are stretched very thin. They're dealing with a variety of other crimes. They may not be responding to your stores. And it's critical to document that event as soon as possible so we can get that into Aura, into an intelligence system that can then be shared. You almost want to make the case for the law enforcement officers as much as possible. When I was at Homeland, I would encourage the organized retail crime investigators to bring their evidence to us, and then we would cross-reference it with our DHS systems, run it through some of our enhanced platforms to see if there was any other type of investigations tied to that group. And oftentimes there was. So I think it's doing your due diligence as you're doing now. Again, I think I reiterated, don't take no for an answer. Continue to try to get somebody to take that case, make it known through any of the community events that you go to, an ORC meeting, conferences, a monthly intel. Everybody on this call has a way to communicate that to law enforcement. A lot of ORC task forces are popping up across the country in multiple states. They're fully dedicated to work everything from a fraud angle to credit card theft to retail crime to gift card fraud, and there are ways to get those things prosecuted. It could also be multi-state. There's some agencies that can look at it from multi-state and work with their federal law enforcement officers, but there's a better case out there. I don't know where it exists. I wanted to reference a case up in Boston that maybe not everybody's aware of. It was about a couple years ago. The gang network that was arrested, over 40 people were arrested. Not only were they tied to violent organized retail crime where they literally would grab stuff from stores and run out from, I think I can read here, 3 or 4 different stores, threaten people that are working at those stores and say, try to stop me. But when they indicted them, they were involved in shootings, gun weapons trafficking, drugs, murder for hire. And the one that killed me is the COVID relief fraud. So this organization also figured out how to get $900,000 in COVID relief fraud money 3 or 4 years after those funds were allocated. So you think in 2024. And that's the criminal network that we talked about. These are the syndicates. This is how they find weak points and opportunities to use the gaps of intelligence to help them thrive as a criminal syndicate. So it's critical that at the retailer level of what your ORC or your store detectives or your AP and LP leaders can document and get captured in our database. So then at some point, if it comes back around, we can share that evidence quickly, help the detectives make those cases as they're stretched very thin with, people don't often talk about it, but there's also shortage in hiring law enforcement. So I just was a detective in Arizona where we were there for reload. We went out and talked to him about his day-to-day, and he's been on 30 years, and he's a one-man shop at this department. So he can only go so far. So when we showed him the Auror platform, we showed him how information can move around and exchange quickly and communicate with the retailers, his eyes just lit up. So I think that's the message I wanted to drop here about the importance, and just take it as much as you can control it, document it, and then hope and continue to push that law enforcement at some point will pick it up and make it a larger case, Mike.
Yeah, very well said. And this is a statement of the obvious, but the easier you can make it for law enforcement, if you've done the due diligence and have all the evidence gathered, the quicker they are to react and to follow up in a way that benefits the retailer. So this notion of connected intelligence is really the basic fundamental platform of Auror, right? It's taking all this data that you ingest and that you record and connecting it in such a way that it makes it easier to get it right versus wrong when you go after these serial offenders. Jim, I know you talked about the New York State Police and how they called upon you, and they took a very aggressive approach in connecting with you. But any other case examples quickly over maybe say a minute or two that you'd want to share that really speak to this whole notion of connected intelligence?
Yeah, so we had, it's kind of a funny case as to how it started. So in our Syracuse market is where we have the biggest, we'll call it, penetration of both operating companies in the same space. And that's where we utilize, I would say, Auror the most to cross over between both operating companies. We had a pretty substantial ORC case that started off with several individuals stealing the large bags of shredded cheese. And we were like, why would they do this? And the investigation ended up being a 9-month investigation and involved 4 bodegas across both our operating companies. We are obviously able to link the cases. We got PD involved. They were able to see the intelligence. And just to quickly summarize, the reason that that wasn't the main thing that they were stealing, but it was the most interesting thing. And they're stealing obviously Red Bull and some of the other merchandise. That's typical, but several of the business owners were arrested. Some of the businesses were closed, either temporarily or permanently. But it started off with the large bags of shredded cheese, and they were using that to actually make pizzas in some of the businesses that we ended up closing down. So I thought that was a pretty interesting case. I always remember that one when we talk about ORC. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Raul, I'm going to kick it back to you. And from where you said, this notion of connected intelligence, what actually changes the equation for law enforcement when you consider that?
It just gives them a clearer picture. The time saving is amazing. Bringing in, and again, I just go back to my time at HSI. The cases that were brought to us from the retailers were amazing. Surveillance, documented times of theft, photos, tracking devices, GPS data, all that was amazing. It's just sometimes the cases weren't being prosecuted because of just overworked prosecutors or not enough push in that city. So I think it's trying to get it where law enforcement is not so stretched thin, and then we could work with the interagency to get it prosecuted. I think the biggest frustration that I see is obviously the feedback loop that doesn't go back to retailers. And I think it's imperative. There are LE people in here, but there might be law enforcement. It's important for you to communicate that back to these folks that do this work day in and day out. Some of the best investigators I've met over the last 5 years of doing this is on the retail side. They dedicate 18-hour days at times chasing criminals across the country and putting themselves in danger. So I think it's that feedback loop. It's painting the picture, trying to map out from your company's holdings of what you know about that crew to include license plate images, associates, anything that can be documented. And then even hosting events where you can have that communicated. I saw something in the Midwest where they just had Shop with a Cop. at one of the ORCAs. I thought it was great. One of the retailers did that. And just forcing the collaboration, Mike, it sounds like it would be simple, but sometimes you got to force that. So then that intelligence can be shared so you can see patterns. So you could then maybe share that with other ORC task forces and, hey, pay attention, by the way, they're hitting Arizona, they're coming to Texas, or they're going up to New Mexico, and let your Nevada team know. And that intelligence continues to spread in the law enforcement space, whether at the sheriffs, police, CIDs, or federal. And that just makes everybody have a better picture of what's transpiring. What really hit us in the gift card fraud space, and I'll just take a digression here to talk about that experience, the ability for criminal networks, specifically Chinese nationals, to infiltrate the U.S. and attack the gift card fraud vulnerability went on for years. And multiple retailers had bits and pieces of it. And then kudos to the larger retailers who took the initiative to invite Homeland Security and the interagency and then created this gift card fraud alliance with so many people. But how many years did that transpire and how much money went back to those criminal networks, right? So it's like the sooner we can identify these threats, these trends, and block them off, and then include the industries that need to be involved, especially on the financial sector, to put a stop to it, Mike, I think is a great example of what happened with that gift card fraud initiative and where we're headed with, you mentioned AI and the ability of payment systems. Who knows where we're going to end up with criminal networks exploiting our vulnerabilities.
Yep. This notion of collaboration, partnership, and communication are really at the core of this. We're 14 minutes before the top of the hour. I want to take about 5 to 6 minutes as we close with those that are listening today. What can they do that they could put into action, whether they're either building an ROC program or rebuilding an ROC program? What are the fundamental things that, from the panelist perspective, that you feel they need, whether it's technical, whether it's team structure, training, relationships, et cetera? So I'd like for each one of the panelists to take just a minute or two and share your top of mind thoughts. And Jim, we'll start with you.
I would say that if the company does not have an organized retail crime program, it doesn't need to be a very big undertaking. I think that the way that we do it here, we use one person, and that person is the point person. They organize all the cases. They go out and meet with law enforcement. They take all of the data and intelligence that we get through our asset protection people in the field, and he is the one that's able to vet the cases, put the most important ones to the top, and then communicate directly with law enforcement, and then, get the intelligence sharing piece of it. And then in some cases, he's able to hand that off to some of the field asset protection folks. So I think that having one person, if you're just starting a program, is critical. There's some very advanced programs that have multiple layers and they have people, so they don't really need that advice. But I think if somebody is if a company is looking to start a program, I think you just one person to manage the program to start, get the intelligence, put it all together, and then you'll able to see what you can work with and what you have. And it's probably a lot more than you think once you start putting the cases together and see who's hitting where and what locations, et cetera. So.
Thank you, Jim. Brian, what would you share with the group?
Really, it's a continuous improvement effort, figuring out how you get all this raw intelligence, how you build those better collaboration partnerships with your law enforcement partners, and even working across the aisle with your partner retailers. With the collaboration opportunities in there, we're building bigger cases. We've brought in retailers into some of these investigations with the law enforcement partners, everyone, and it really accelerates your ability to build that case bigger, faster, and close it faster so you can move on to the next major priority. And leveraging where you do have labor resources, be flexible and change often if you need to make sure that you can make the biggest impact. You get all these new tools applied. You got to figure out how to use your human capital to put them to work. And then we've all talked about agentic AI. I know that's something coming in the future, really keeping an eye on how we'll leverage that to get the biggest bang for our buck on all these connected technologies and how we can kind of increase our output in the investigation space.
Thank you. Raul, we'll look to you to close us out, my friend.
Thank you. Just a couple of things for examples. I think retailers on this call, even law enforcement, you want to look at the data. Jump in on the Auror website, look at some of the examples that we have. I'll reiterate what my colleagues have said, but There's reduction in service to calls from Anchorage, from an initiative started in September with Auror and a partnership with Axon and the Retail Crime Hub that changed the game up there. 15% reduction in calls specifically to that region, 28% drop in retail theft cases, 148 cases prosecuted in September of 2025. That's a commitment from the mayor to the chief of police, to the deputy, down to the detectives, the retailers, and the community saying not in our community. That was, something that was done in coordination with the Organized Retail Crime Alliance up there. So that's one example. On grocery specific, we have a Constantino's case study in our website. People can look at that. And 15 out of the 20 top offenders were prevented from coming back based on the intelligence that they are documenting during that time frame of when they came on the platform going back a year. And the return of investment was huge for that company and easily identifiable if you want to see what it really looks like. So go on the Auror website. I think Jim's got that relationship with Schenectady. We've had some multiple successes up there as well with that relationship of getting law enforcement exchanging with retailers on a day-to-day basis. But then the number one thing is just to go back to what the gent said on this call. Is like, take your audit of what you have, what resources you have, whether you have one LP, an AP, whether you have a SOC, whether you have a GSOC, whether you have 10 investigators or just one, and do what you can to document these cases. Get that critical, viable intelligence into a system. Get it to where you can correlate that data and see if who your repeat offenders are. Focus on that 10%. Maybe even kick it up and be challenging and look for the 20%, as the deputy chief of Anchorage has said in open settings about how aggressive they want to be going after the 20% prolific offenders to make sure that they don't affect their stores. And then reach out to the community, law enforcement, go to forums. There's national district attorney associations that should pay attention to. There's a lot going on in that space. And I know some states are less aggressive as others. Don't use that as an excuse. Figure out a way to get these cases into law enforcement hands. Ask for that feedback loop that I always talk about to make it fair for the retailers to get that information back. They work really hard. They should hear what's going on their cases. And then share it to your uncomfortable. I like to steal that from some of the former presentations I've done on the LE side, specifically to drugs. We used to force it with DEA and FBI, where HSI would say, you know what? It doesn't matter who gets credit. Just share until it's uncomfortable. Let's get this damn thing prosecuted. Let's get these people off the streets, and let's make our community safer. So that's my ending message before we take some questions, my friend.
Thank you very much. And listen, I want to thank you, Jim, Ryan, and you, Raul, for participating today. And importantly, I want to thank everyone who joined us.
Well, unfortunately, guys, we're out of time. I think that a great conversation today. I think we probably could have gone another hour, just based on everything that we've been here to talk about. If you're interested in getting your loss prevention qualified or your loss prevention certified certification, please feel free to leverage your promo code there on the screen. That would be LPF 2026. It's available through the end of the year. It's also eligible for lifetime membership and is definitely beneficial to waive those recertification fees. Keep in mind that Auror will be at NRF Protect this year at booth 1505.
You know, Jacque, I sit on the executive committee of the foundation, and if you don't have your LPC or your LPQ, I highly encourage you to do that. Knowledge is power. There's rich information and education here. If you don't have it, get after it. That will be my word of advice.
Thanks, Mike. And there's a lot of good things going on with the certifications right now, too. I strongly recommend that everybody out there take a look at getting their LPQ or their LPC. All right, if you are interested in attending future webinars, we do have a QR code to register for notifications. That would be the one there on the left. Okay. We have different webinars on different topics all the time, and we would love for you to continue joining us. Also, if you haven't already signed up for a free LP magazine, that is free today. Of course, it's free every day. Please use that QR code there in the middle of the screen. Okay, that'll get you to a registration page where you can qualify to get your LP magazine. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you once again for our sponsor, Auror. You can reach Auror again at www.auror.co. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Raul, Mike, Jim, and Ryan, and of course, all of you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror. Don't forget to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast app.